welcome to another week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica. I'm very excited this week to welcome our guest, April Walsh. April, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I'm very excited because this week we are talking about one of the best named tabletop RPGs ever, which is called Thirsty Sword Lesbians. So if you have any questions at any point, please pop them down wherever you're watching this live. We'll happily answer your questions about the game. So jump in and get involved. So before we dig in and start talking about the game, April, could you tell us a little bit about your history with tabletop RPGs? So like, what was the first RPG you remember playing?
It was in second grade on the school bus. Okay. I ran a campaign of the licensed Star Wars RPG, the D6 based game by West End Games. And I remember very little about the plot. I remember we had a Wookiee, Jedi, and an astromech droid, which sounds like the setup to a joke, like they walk into a bar. And we rolled dice in a shoebox, and I've been playing games ever since then. So, when I was young, I played a lot of the traditional games like D&D and Shadowrun and Paranoia. And then, in the past decade or so, I've been discovering the narrative side of the hobby, like Fate and the Apocalypse Engine and related games.
Amazing. And as well as being a tabletop RPG player, you have a very impressive day job as well. So you are a civil liberties attorney, is that correct?
Yes, I work at an organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and our mission is to ensure that new technology promotes people's rights and liberties rather than impinging on them. And my focus is in net neutrality, artificial intelligence, and a lot of speech-related issues, making sure that activists are able to organize online and that people are able to express themselves without a government or a corporation getting in the way.
I mean, that's just so impressive and intimidating. So not only do you have an amazing tabletop RPG, your day job is like this kick-ass job as well. So yeah, thank you so much for finding the time to come on between all the many busy things that you're doing there. I'm getting a little bit of feedback on your mic. I don't know if you can pull it away a little bit or just pull it out a little bit.
Breathing right into it. Is that what's happening?
I was just getting a little bit of feedback, but I think it should be fine now. But yeah, so thank you so much for coming on.
You know what it is? It's my fan.
Oh, okay. All right, you want to go grab
out of the wind stream?
Yes, no problem, if that works. It's always something when it's live. So what we're going to mostly be talking about, as I've mentioned before, is obviously Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which I think you're very well known for. But how did you go from creating games and working in the games industry from being somebody who's a player?
Well, I think a lot of RPGs leave a lot of space for people to do their own creation and game design in the course of play and preparing games. My first sort of standalone hacks were, it was a long time ago, but throughout sort of the hobby, you design little mini games. And if you're playing a tactical game, anytime you're designing an encounter, you're doing a little bit of game design because you are trying to make sure that it's balanced, that there are interesting things to do on the map, there are interesting objectives, because it's not really fun to just have two lines of people go and like whack at each other. But I think I got more excited about it when I saw the possibilities that narrative first game design opens up. So Fate in particular was my introduction to this side of the hobby, where the mechanics are really focused not on trying to simulate something, but on trying to generate a satisfying narrative structure. And then the Powered by the Apocalypse Engine gives you this like neat little nugget of game design in the form of like a move where it prompts you to think about, what are the three possible outcomes and how do you make all of them interesting. So I think Thirsty Sword Lesbians is an evolution of ideas from that side of the narrative gaming hobby within RPGs. And I really was excited about the prospect of telling stories that had intense emotions and a lot of action and also centered sort of queer joy and power. So it was something where I wanted to play this game and it didn't exist yet, so I had to write it.
Amazing. That's always where the best ideas come from, I think, because it's something that somebody's so passionate about and has a really kind of a clear idea.
I still adore playing Thirsty Sword Lesbians. I play it all the time, and particularly with all of the community content that people are coming up with, and new playbooks and adventures and settings. It's really neat to make a game and then get to play it, but also get to play parts of it that you didn't have to write.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, if other people in the community love it so much, they're wanting to create stuff, that you know you're onto a winner with it, I think, when that's happening. So for people, I mean, Thirsty Sword Lesbians has done so well. The Kickstarter at the end of 2020 had like 8,000 backers. Since then, it's gone on to win kind of Any Awards and Nebula Awards, and there's an expansion to it as well, and everything's going on. But in case people are unaware and have not heard about Thirsty Sword Lesbians, how would you briefly describe it? What's the kind of brief elevator pitch you tell to people about it?
Yeah, Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a game of queer action romance that celebrates queer love and power in any setting where swords cross and hearts race. So there is a sense in which it's setting agnostic, but it's definitely not genre agnostic. It is like a queer action romance, and I'll often describe the vibe to people as, if you remember the fight in The Princess Bride on top of the cliffs of insanity, where Wesley and Inigo are doing their sword play and they're kind of giving each other compliments and like smiling at each other, and then they lock blades and Wesley gets like pressed against the stones at the top of the cliffs of insanity, and then they kiss. That's the vibe for Thirsty Sword Lesbians. And mechanically, it is a narrative first, feelings first sort of system where the playbooks, which are like character classes in other games, are built around an emotional conflict and arc. So if you are the Devoted is on the screen, the Devoted is all about trying to balance the thing they're devoted to with taking care of themselves, learning self-care. So there's an element of that toxic self-sacrifice. The Trickster they crave intimacy, but they're afraid of being vulnerable, and so they have all these sneaky disguisey moves, and but they also have a mechanic where when they bottle it up too much, eventually they burst, and you have this like mechanical permission to have this like tirade of all the feelings that you've been bottling up and confess your love and your anger and do the thing that you've been holding back from because you're afraid. And so the different archetypes are structured in that way, and through play, a character, if you're playing a long-term campaign, a character will evolve through several different playbooks. So once they sort of resolve that emotional conflict and grow past it, then another one arises, which as it happens. So that's sort of the focus of the characters that you're telling stories about, and then the action is very it's also very narrative and feelings focused in the sense that you don't take damage, you take emotional conditions that are difficult to deal with and that you can resolve either by getting emotional support or by acting out. And that's a concept from Masks, which is another Powered by the Apocalypse game that I modified for Thirsty Sword Lesbians because I think it fits really well. There are rules. Basically, if you are in a sword fight with someone, you could be rolling to fight them if you're trying to overcome them, but you might just roll to flirt with them, or you might roll to figure them out. And there are some truths of the heart that are only visible when your blades are locked. That's just one of the conceits of this genre. So, right, the combat is sort of a metaphor for being in this like intense point of conflict, and it's interesting because your relationship with your opponent and with your comrades can change as a result of going through that sort of difficult, dramatic moment. That's why it's interesting to have the fight. So that's all of that is part of what I mean when I say that it's narrative first and feelings first.
Definitely. I mean, so as you've mentioned, it's using kind of a hack of Powered by the Apocalypse, and so we have all these great archetypes. When I was reading through, and I won't say which one, I was thinking, oh, how dare she just like write about me? Have other people have said this to you, that they've like looked at some of the archetypes and like heavily identified?
Absolutely.
Any of them, yeah.
And so yes, like every time people are picking characters for the first time, it's like, why would you call me out like this? Or this is too real, I don't want to play this.
It's not role playing if you play yourself.
But it's also been really interesting the way the way that some of these experiences are shared outside of queerness, just people who experience other
Okay.
marginalizations have talked to me about, like, this playbook sort of speaks to my experience as like a biracial immigrant in the United
Oh,
States.
okay.
I'm like, that's fascinating. I had no idea, but I'm really delighted that it's an experience that um, is broader than anything that I have personal experience with. And we try to do that by including sort of 5 other authors who wrote settings in the core book,
Hmm.
as well as all the stretch goals that are now collected in the
Yeah.
expansion, along with some bonus stuff. So we wanted it to not just be me trying to represent all queer experience, but to
Yeah.
right, to be
Yeah.
welcoming to a lot more of a range of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, the queer community is such a big and diverse group. It would be impossible for one person to try and encompass and represent all things to kind of all people. When you were creating the kind of archetype, what was your kind of approach to that and your thought process behind a couple of them?
So the very well, let's see. So I had previously done some design work creating archetypes that were based on narrative arcs, and I wanted to bring that into Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
Hmm.
And I think the one of the challenges for designing the 9 core playbooks is you only
Hmm.
have 9, and
Yeah.
you need to sort of try to represent a pretty broad range of experiences. So some of them, the Chosen is quite broad. The Chosen is basically um, fate, or your family or society or your adoring public have an expectation of you that's not
Hmm.
necessarily what you want, but it imbues you with power if you live up to this expectation. And that's a really broad concept. um,
Yeah.
and there are, trying to think of what are more specific concepts. The nature witch is the baby gay kind of concept, or the baby trans person. They have
Yeah.
figured something out about themselves, and now interacting with other people feels really new, and they're exploring sort of how they can move in the world, what experiences they can have, what relationships they can have. I think
Hmm.
that's a little bit more specific, even though it's something that a lot of people go through. So
Hmm.
the balance there is trying to have an archetype that is punchy. It speaks to a sort of cohesive plot and emotional conflict that's fun to play with. But for the core book,
Hmm.
it's broad enough that about a ninth
Hmm.
of players are going to be interested in it, and collectively people are going to be able to find some options they're excited about. And one of the neat things about the expansion and all the fan playbooks is they don't have to do that. They can be a lot more niche. We can have the Legion
Hmm.
in the expansion, who is a reincarnated warrior with past life trauma, and as they use their powers they lose their memories of this life, and it's tragic and dramatic and really exciting.
Yeah.
That's Pam Punzellen who wrote that, and it's incredible. It's a lot of fun to play, but it's not for every game, and it's not
Hmm.
necessarily a character that fits every setting. And we had the freedom to do that when we were designing the expansion books, and that was a lot of fun too.
For sure. When I was looking through the book, one of the things that struck me that I really liked was the way you looked at kind of safety mechanics. So I'd love to talk about that a bit, because obviously this is a game where there's like romance and high drama, and you're going to be flirting with people, and so obviously you want to do that in a way where everybody's comfortable. So could you talk us through how you try to approach that with the book?
I could talk you through that for a long time, because I have this like 4 layers of safety that I try to embody in
Let's
a
go
game.
through them.
Let's
We've got the
Sure,
time. We're
totally
here for
great.
that. Yeah.
So I always feel like the first layer of safety is who is at the table with you. Um,
Hmm.
and one of the reasons that Thirsty Sword Lesbians is named what it is because it attracts the kind of people I want to play with and repulses the people I don't want to play with. And that's kind of a
Perfect.
safety mechanism.
Yeah.
The kind of people who are excited about playing this game, we've got sort of one level of buy-in and excitement about sort of being queer positive.
Yeah.
Another level is the expectations that are set by the game text. So we've got the
Hmm.
no fascists, no bigots, cat girl messing up a cop car art page. Um,
Hmm.
we've got the ideas for flirting, including a lot of bad ideas and a lot of setting
Yeah.
expectations that these are disaster lesbians. You do not have to be good at flirting. You don't have to be suave or anything to play this game. Several of the playbooks are by default really awkward. The spooky witch will just blurt out things about her special interest, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful. Like she has the move "I like snails," and it lets her flirt, but in like a cute, awkward way.
Yeah.
So that's sort of making that expectation something healthy through the text that's on the page and in the book. And then the next layer is the game mechanics. Well, maybe it's easier to talk first about just explicit safety mechanics. So like X
Sure. Yeah.
card, checking card, things that a lot of people are probably familiar with, that both set the expectation that what we care about is player safety rather than like verisimilitude or narrative satisfaction or whatever. What's more important is the people who are gathered around this table,
Yeah.
and helping people communicate using those tools. And then the fourth is what's baked into the general mechanics. So you wouldn't think of it as a safety mechanic, but for instance, there's no role to seduce someone, right? There's no like make someone be attracted to you or whatever. There is an
Sure.
entice move, and you can get emotional leverage that way, and then they get the option of picking how they react to it. So there are a bunch
Sure.
of moves that create a conversation where you're basically coming up with a proposal, right? And the mechanics will tell you what sort of options you get to pick. But then the other person gets to decide, do I open up to them? And then like, how do I want to react? And what feelings do I feel? If you take a condition, which are what the difficult emotional states are called, you get to decide which one. So it's not telling you how to feel. And I think a really important point is that this is true for the PC's interaction with NPCs as well, because it can feel a little gross if someone's like, I'm going to roll dice and bend this NPC to my will, and like, especially if it's in a romantic
Yeah.
setting,
It's
that's
not the
just
vibe.
so even with NPCs, if you get sort of this currency of emotional insight or leverage called a string, if you spend it, sometimes they'll just do what you want, but they might not. You might instead find out what it would take to get them to do what you want if it's possible. So it connects their behavior and actions to their sort of internal life and preferences instead of you
Yeah.
overriding it and you're not caring what their feelings are. And figuring other people out is a big part of the game. It's one of the two things that's especially effective to do when you're in a combat situation is try to figure out this other person, and sort of where they're coming from or how are they vulnerable, like, depending on what approach you want to take to your encounter with them. So that safety element is a really important part of all of the game design, the design of all of the moves, and the options that you have in play.
Yeah, I love as well what you did when you mentioned in the rules as well. You can play entirely without it being sexual or romantic in any way. So if perhaps you are not comfortable playing that, or if you're ace or your character's going to be ace, you can easily not have to play it like that. So
Yeah,
it's entirely yeah.
it fits very well with a found family narrative where you have a bunch of queers and they've all got their issues, but they all care about each other and work together, at least in the end. Maybe you have some fun friction and some you have some interpersonal drama because it's fun. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't have to be either romantic or sexual. I mean, there are no sex rules, right? Like some Powered by the Apocalypse games will have sex moves, um,
Okay.
and I didn't include those for a variety of reasons, but there is an optional intimacy move that doesn't trigger on sex. It triggers on when you lower your last guard with someone. And
Okay.
essentially, then you ask them, a meaningful question, and if they say yes, your connection to them is so strong that they sort of share part of your playbook features. But that's a level. There are a couple of levels to sort of expressing your interest or intimacy with other characters. One that I'm really proud of is it's a basic move that you can do at any time. It's called smitten. You can declare that you're smitten with someone, and
Yeah.
there's a little mechanic associated with it. Like they get a string because they have emotional leverage on you, and you answer a question. that relates to your playbook's core conflict. So the trickster who's afraid of vulnerability and intimacy, your question is, what secret do you have that you're sure would make them reject you? So it's basically, it's a signal, right? I know.
Yeah, sorry.
But,
Yeah.
by picking your playbook, you're sort of expressing what kind of drama
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of like heart-wrenching moments you are excited about your character experiencing. And so if you declare smitten, you get a little like moment of spotlight on the fact that you are interested in this relationship getting some attention, and you are interested in this particular kind of conflict, making that fun and dramatic. So and that's all it does. It's mechanically, but in the course of play, it has this tremendous signaling function. It's really sweet. It's also just fun to see what people are declaring smitten in response to, because you can do it whenever you want. And of course, it's always your choice to do it. It never happens without your permission. Although the scoundrel, whose whole deal is that they like they keep moving on to new conquests, there are incentives for them to declare smitten with people they've just met, because that's their deal. They're the scoundrel. They, for whatever reason, and you define it when you make your character, haven't been able to or make a stable connection with people, and so they're sort of serially exploring new horizons that way. And that's a way that the mechanics in this one in particular reinforce the playbook conflicts.
For sure. One thing I was just going to ask about that came to mind was because we're talking about playing kind of romance a lot. And I think some people might have just played like a more classic RPG like DnD or something like that, and maybe didn't explore that narrative side of things, because this game is very much about like you say, intimacy and connection, which can be a really vulnerable thing to kind of role play. So what sort of kind of advice would you give to somebody who's perhaps playing this style of game for the first time when they're approaching the table?
I think, particularly if you're coming from a D&D type setting, that's a game where there's a tactical combat game, and then like role playing happens also, and some of the mechanics interact with the role playing, but it's not sort of the core activity of the game, or like the focus of the rule set. Here, I think the most important just bit of advice is that there's not a right way to play your character or any particular character. The playbooks will help guide you towards stuff that's interesting for the conflict that you said you're excited about. But I know a lot of people have anxiety about doing something suboptimal or being awkward, and like there are a lot of awkward queers, and that's okay. I am one of them, and it's supported in the game. You don't have to bring as much from outside the mechanics as you do in a game that doesn't focus on this kind of thing. And one of the other safety principles that I didn't think to touch on before is there is usually a mechanic that you can fall back on. If you're role playing this great scene and then you're like, I don't know what to say next, you can go to the entice rules, or you can go to the emotional support rules, and sort of you calibrate it to what your comfort is for doing that improv and coming up with your character stuff. And then going to dice is an option that you've always got as a safety net. And that was an intentional design option, because even people who are often really excited about improving anything might have had a long day at work, might not be up for it this particular session. So they'll sort of do what they can. If you lose your train of thought, you'll be like, okay, well, let's go to the dice, because there is more mechanical support and more interesting mechanical options for those like role playing and social encounters than there is in a game that doesn't focus on that.
That's some really great advice. I love that. I think what you said as well about leaning into playing a character that maybe is awkward and inexperienced and experiences the gay panic or the freeze, that can be a great role play moment. Because I had a game I was playing with somebody, and there's 4 queer women on the table, and someone kind of came over and did a little minor flirt thing. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I went and gave it back, and then the player, not the character, just kind of froze and was like, oh, okay, and then just had a panic moment, and it was all fine. It was all consensual. It wasn't like a problem, but they were just like, I didn't realize we were going to do that, because it just wasn't in the game. And I think those moments can be really great. And I imagine Thirsty Sword Lesbians has so many of those fun moments where everyone's just kind of enjoying that vibe.
And that's a good point as well, in terms of what you're expecting to get out of that game experience, right? Like, if you go into Thirsty Sword Lesbians, you probably know that you're going to have those moments of emotional intimacy and vulnerability. It might default to flirty. It might be chosen family. There's a palette exercise at the start to figure that out. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can say, I'm not interested in my character being flirty, but I am excited to see you all do it. Maybe I'll play the Nature Witch, take the I ship it move, and do some matchmaking. But there are options at the sort of game level and at the character level for opting in or out of that stuff, and having foreknowledge that that's going to be a theme of the game, which is really important when you're doing things that are potentially intimate.
For sure. I feel like we've covered kind of the thirsty part and the lesbians part, but I think we should talk about swords.
Always.
Tell me about swords in this game, April.
Sure. Everyone has a sword. There are some settings where people don't have swords because your conflict is about an intense chess match where you're smoldering over the game board at someone else. But in general, people have swords. It's a frequent conceit that even if you're just like in a modern setting, it's like our world, but also everyone has swords, and it's normal to challenge somebody to a duel.
Amazing.
So the swords represent they represent the aesthetic of the character, for one. It's part of the three things that you define about the aesthetics of your characters: their demeanor, their clothes, and their sword. Those are, our first impression of each of the characters. And so you'll have eldritch swords and elemental swords and thirsty swords and ornate swords, and the sword that used to belong to an enemy, and a broken sword. And they are part of your personality. But also, we touched a little bit earlier on the way that aesthetic of intimate conflict, right? You are close. You are, if it's cinematic, you're locking blades. You don't really do that in real life, but absolutely lock blades and lock eyes. Like, spin around if you want to, show off. It's all sort of fair game. There's definitely like an element of camp, which is a thread in a lot of sort of queer creations, and it gives you those moments of engagement with interesting people that you might come to despise or be attracted to, or both, or redeem them, or realize that they can't be redeemed and you have to overcome them, but you care about them and that costs something, or figure out sort of why they're like this, with what like belief they have that is driving them into this conflict. And so the swords are just fun. And who doesn't like a sword lesbian?
I know I certainly do. There's three perfect things that I love in this book. So the title just drew me, and it worked. I was the target audience. If you are also the target audience and have been enjoying listening to us talking, the website swordlesbians.com is where you can purchase this, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So you can go and have a look on there for the PDFs and the physical copies of the books. And there's also more information on all the community things and stuff going on there. Because April, there's an amazing community surrounding this game. Could you tell us some of the stuff that's going on, and if people are interested, how they can get involved?
Absolutely. So it's all offered under an open license, which is a modified version of Creative Commons. You have all the rights under a Creative Commons attribution share alike license, and then some additional rights. And so that means that anyone can go ahead and like create stuff that builds on Thirsty Sword Lesbians and then share it back to the community and make money off of it. And all that information is at poweredbylesbians.com. But that's sort of like the legal permission-y stuff. The way to do it is kind of to do it. And like, if you tag me on Twitter, I will be very excited. I might be busy. I might be slow to respond, but I'll be very excited to talk about it. If you use the hashtag, other people who are creating will be excited to talk about it. And some of the very cool things that have come out of it are the Blade Soul by Michelle Jones, which is the playbook where you become a weapon for your wielder. And so you are expressing trust for them and giving them a little bit of your autonomy, and the conflict is feeling like you have to be of use to someone else in order to be deserving. So that's intense. That's wonderful. I have played the Blade Soul. I love it. There is the Admirer, which is by Kona Goodhart of Darling Bat Games, and that is the playbook for, do I want her or do I want to be her? And so, right?
Yeah.
So it has mechanical support for going through that kind of exploration. Like, I'm really interested in this person. I'm gonna try being a little like them, and how does that fit for me? And it sort of defers that smitten question till the end of that inquiry, right? Like, do you actually feel this way for this person? So that's super neat. Chrissy Freeman has written a ton of settings and playbooks. The playbook that I will highlight here is The Tempered, which is about someone who has survived trauma and is balancing protecting themselves versus being vulnerable, and it's done through the metaphor of the tempering of a sword. So how flexible and how hard have you tempered the steel of the sword? Is it hard enough to hold an edge? Is it flexible enough not to break? And that's just like an intense and relatable experience for a lot of people as well. So people are doing really exciting. Those are all playbooks. There are settings. So Lexi the Fae did Dracula's Wake, where you have all just finished slaying Dracula, and the only reason you vampires, other monsters, and monster hunters were working together was because you were united against Dracula. But now you might try to seize an advantage for yourself. And that's a fun one. It's a good one for Halloween. Coming up. So yeah, those are some examples of things that people are doing. Lots of settings and playbooks.
In the main book as well, that so that if you're just new to this and you're like, great, I'm just gonna start with getting the book and kind of go from there. So there's different adventures in the book. Is it possible to talk us through some of them without giving any kind of spoilers away, just to get a vibe for what sort of stories we'll be telling there?
Yeah. So there are a bunch of settings that are written to be sort of fertile ground for a campaign and have multiple adventure hooks in them. So there is the steampunk coal era, like worker exploitation and speakeasies kind of setting that Janaea Kemper wrote for the core book, where you're basically in the working class of this industrial revolution, semi-fantastic. It's fantastic. It's airships and
amazing,
and that kind of thing. And there is, not only are you sort of fighting for the the rights of your comrades, but there is a poetry to it and a magic in the way that your sword gets manifested. So that's one that's it's a really neat setting. It's a lot of fun to swing from a rope dangling from a zeppelin and smash through the window of the robber barons. There is the Three Orders of Ardor, which is by Whitney Delaglio, and that is a setting where you are a holy champion of an order that cares a lot about taking care of other people, protecting them as well, but it's not a smitey order. It is a caring order. There are 3 orders to pick from, and this is one of the settings in the game that's explicitly sex worker positive and supporting of sex
amazing.
workers. So there's that. The Starcross Galaxy is the setting that I wrote, and then there are specific adventures that the best day of their lives is you are a delegation from Queertopia attending an important political wedding on the planet of Heteronormia, and hijinks ensue. As you might expect, not everyone on Heteronormia is as straight or cis as that society would have you believe. And they give you some help. So, so that's sort of like an extremely like campy, direct, like subtext is for cowards kind of adventure. And then I'm also pretty proud of the Sparkle Heart setting, which is one where you were all magical girls like 10 years ago when you were in college, and you fought the beasts and were victorious, and then we're done and sort of all drifted apart. And so the start of this adventure has something return that clearly resembles what you fought before, but it seems like a person now. It's not just sort of like an amorphous force that you can annihilate with your sparkle beam without remorse. And you all are going to need to get back together to deal with it. But like, can you conjure that magic still? Can you like recapture that friendship? What kind of resentment has been simmering for years? Like, why did you drift apart? So that's one that's very focused on relationships among the player characters, as opposed to like, you're all from Queertopia, you're all on the same page, go like clear stuff up in Heteronormia.
So it sounds like there's loads of different like styles of games you could have here. You have some that could be quite angsty and emotional and deep, and others that are just like you say, complete queer joy, very campy. In playtesting, do you have any good like moments or stories that stood out to you, that or something someone did that you were like, oh, I didn't think that was going to happen, but fine, yeah, that works?
I mean, there's got to be. One of my favorite moments was actually we were streaming live. We were doing. Oh, all right. Well, first, that like I didn't realize you could do that is so Christy Freeman, who has written a bunch of the stuff for is actually in the expansion book as well as writing community stuff, was playing a scoundrel, and the scoundrel has a move called Rip, where when you're engaged in something dangerous, you can declare that your clothing has torn and left you like practically indecent. And she asked, "Can I just be all the way indecent?" Yeah, that's not going to ruin the game balance. And so there's a lot of stuff like that. It's fun finding the combinations of playbooks that have interesting interactions. So there are a couple of playbooks. I'm thinking of the Dream Mirror from Advanced Lovers and Lesbians, where the Dream Mirror is like, you don't really know who you are. You're such a people pleaser. You're always doing things for others. And they have some really interesting interactions with playbooks like the Devoted, who's really devoted to something and like also doing that like self-sacrifice thing, but they're very sure of who they are. It's not necessarily healthy, but they've got that certainty. Or like the Chosen has a destiny. The expectation, it's very easy for the Dream Mirror to think that that's what they want and like try to help. So there you find sort of fun dynamics. The Infamous and the Scoundrel are a really fun pairing. In playtesting at Big Bad Con, I think 2018, we had an Infamous and a Scoundrel and a Chosen. So the Infamous is the former villain who is seeking redemption and trying to do right, and they're very righteous. And the Scoundrel, we talked about, like they hurt people because they haven't figured out how not to. And they were both into the Chosen. They had this like deep tension because the Infamous is like, you are hurting people and you're hurting people I care about. Eventually one or both of them realized that the Chosen they were both smitten with was like really into trashy romance novels and would be really excited if they fought over her. And so they had this intense duel where like they're working, they're like yelling at each other, they're like trying to figure each other out to get their like at the truth of what's going on. And it was just spectacular. There's a similar one more story. It was actually, I think, the first stream that I wasn't involved with. I watched it, and you clearly, it wasn't a kind of system that people were familiar with. They were like, okay, so like we want to have it, like we're angry at each other, we're gonna fight. Like, what? There are no rules for who's better at swords. Like, what an oversight. But 30 seconds later, one of them has instead rolled to figure the other one out, and they're like, the reason none of your relationships last is because you're still in love with the pirate queen and you can't have her. And I'm just like, oh, my game made them do something cool. Right? They were just gonna roll to see whose sword was better, and like instead there's like the drama that this person has. So that was like a moment in playtesting where I just rubbed my little gay hands together and cackled because the game was doing what I wanted it to do.
Amazing. That must be such a fun moment to have in there. We are coming up near to the top of the hour, so if you're watching live and you have any questions for April, please pop them in the chat now and we can answer them for you. But April, I was going to say, is there anything you'd like to share about Thirsty Sword Lesbians, or a question you'd wish I'd asked about it?
I just want to shout out the art, because the art is really fantastic. Kanisha did the cover and all of the iconic characters, and then there are a bunch of different artists who contributed the interior covers or the interior illustrations. Hannah Templar did the cover for the expansion, and they're all just amazing, and it was so fun to work with all of them. And Trivia Fox, the art director, was an incredible talent and help with all of that. But they were excited to get to draw Thirsty Sword Lesbians, and that felt really good.
Yeah.
And I sneaked some of my OCs in there. I know like at least one of the artists sneaked an OC in there as well, because there is a thematic connection between this kind of like unapologetic queer joy and like fandom, fan communities like femslash and fan fiction, where in that case the focus is on shipping canon characters, and this is having those kind of like fun dynamics and tropey moments with like original characters. So a lot of my original characters wound up in there. Do you have the Tentacula, the iconic infamous with the big red head tentacles, is a character that I played in a game of For the Honor by MX Quinn, who it's a lightweight game inspired by She-Ra, and it's GM-less, and you're having drama with each other. And I think there are definitely like common themes. People look at their Sword Lesbians and be like, oh, it's Utena the RPG, or it's She-Ra the RPG, or more recently, it's Our Flag Means Death, but sapphic. And I think part of that is there isn't a ton of like sapphic representation in mass media. There's even less that uses swords for some reason. But it's not poorly represented in the fandom, right? Like people want it, people enjoy it, people want to see themselves represented that way.
Definitely. Well, we have some fans here in watching live as well, some backers of both the original and the advanced Lovers and Lesbians. So thanks very much for coming along and supporting. If you have not had the chance to play yet, as we've mentioned, if you go to swordlesbians.com, you can check out all the options there for things you can get to play a game yourself.
I will say, for your European audience, you may not be able to order directly from there, but reach out to your regional game distributor, because Evil Hat does distribute the game internationally.
There we go. And the PDFs are always there on the site, though. So I say wherever you are in the world, you can always get the PDF, which is you can get to play the game that way. So April, the question I ask everyone near the end of the show is, do you have any other tabletop RPGs you'd like to recommend? And the rules to the question is, it can't be one you've made, and it can't be D&D.
Yeah. There are a lot. I love game. I think I would be remiss if I didn't shout out to Apocalypse Keys by Ray Najati, which is kickstarting right now. It
Oh wow,
is
okay.
it is a game that is about monsters trying to prevent the apocalypse. So there's like a sort of Hellboy aspect to it, where like you are monsters, you're trying to protect the world, and it's also just deeply queer and deeply invested in the relationships between these characters. It's a similar kind of engine as well, but it's Apocalypse Keys. It's kickstarting now. I got to play test it and had a lot of fun with my person who was pretending to be a snake goddess, but was actually just the cast off skin shedding of the snake goddess from before she died.
What a concept!
And the game really facilitates like weird and emotionally dramatic concepts as well. So I'd also recommend, I think like in the lightest end of the spectrum of RPGs would be like a prompt-based game like For the Queen by Alex Roberts. So this is a game, it's GM-less, and the whole game is prompts. They're question prompts that are about your relationship to the Queen and to one another as you are going on this journey to try to make peace between your land and another land. And especially if you're a game designer, play it and look at how much you can do with a very light mechanic of prompts, because the stories that come out of it wind up being pretty emotionally powerful and dramatic, and it's also a great sort of introduction for people who haven't played an RPG before or haven't played anything other than D&D to see sort of something at like something that's like is easy to get into and is on a different side of the spectrum. And the last one, I'm really excited for the new version of The Watch that Ash Kreider is working on. The Watch is an RPG about women and non-binary people opposing an evil god who is not so secretly the patriarchy and has the power to like get into people's minds and affect what they do. And in your struggle against this force, the tone is a little bit more grim than Thirsty Sword Lesbians. You have like a jaded track as you get worn down by having to like fight the fight, but you also have these moments of connection that are really important. So I really like The Watch. It's one of the influences that I'd cite for Thirsty Sword Lesbians, and it's getting a new edition soon. So I would definitely look out for that one.
Maybe one for my list to write down for future guests.
Yeah, definitely. Talk to Ash, talk to Ray, talk to Alex. Like all those creators are fantastic.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for those recommendations, and thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on to share Thirsty Sword Lesbians with us, because like all three things are things that I certainly enjoy, and lots of people in the chat have said so as well. So next week we are back with Not D&D. We are talking about Wise Women, which is where the players take on the role of witches living in a remote village. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. But you can get the full schedule of everything we're doing at enliverpg.com to check out what we're doing. But for now, I think we've come up to the end of the hour, so I'll say goodbye. Thanks so much for watching, and April, thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you for having me. Good night.